Well, good morning again. Morning. During these 4 Sundays of September, we're going to be diving into one of my favorite books, especially one of my favorite short books of the Bible, the book of Jonah. And most people, even if you are not regularly in church, even if you've never read the Bible, most people have some kind of familiarity with Jonah. And it usually comes down to one character in the story. And it's not Jonah. It's the fish, right? The whale. And in fact, it's this big fish, this whale or fish, that becomes either the reason that people embrace the story, are drawn to it because of kind of the fantasy of this giant fish swallowing this man, Jonah, or it's the reason that they reject the story. Because they say, well, how could that possibly be true? But friends, Jonah is so much more than a story about a big fish. It's your story. And it's my story. It's our human story. It's a description of the human heart and how we operate. And more importantly, the story of Jonah gives us a glimpse into God's story, God's heart, how he moves, how he operates. In fact, it's to the extent that when Christians were looking for a sign of how they might display God's love to the world, they didn't first use a cross. They used a fish. They said to the onlooking world, if you want to know who God is, if you want to have just a glimpse into how much he loves you, then all you need to do is look to Jonah. So let's do just that as we turn to God's word this morning.
Good morning. My name is Roger Nienor, and I serve as an elder here at First Pres. Today's scripture is from the book of Jonah, chapter 1. Now hear the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord came down to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because the wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah had ran away from the Lord and heading for Tarsus. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port, and after paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarsus to flee from the Lord. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he'll take notice on us so that we will not perish." Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots and find out who is responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? And from what people are you?" He answered, "I am a Hebrew and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." This terrified them, and they asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher. So they asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it will become calm. I know that this is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." Instead, the men did their best to row back to the land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, "Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, Lord, have done all you pleased." Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea calmed. All this meant the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the fish belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Roger. Jonah's story is split into 4 chapters that create for us 4 episodes. And as Jonah's story unfolds over these 4 episodes, we see that we find one of the Bible's most compelling views, insights, glimpses into God's heart, into God's love for us. Especially how expansive that love is, that it expands past Him just loving us, and it expands even to the extent that He loves those who we find most unlovely or unlovable, most difficult to love. So let's dive into this first episode. And what we'll see today, what I hope we see today, is Jonah's escape on one hand, and then secondly, God's pursuit. So Jonah's escape and God's pursuit. So the first question is, what is Jonah trying to escape from? Why is Jonah on the run? The book begins with this first 2 verses. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me." And immediately, the first reason that we're given that would have been apparent to everyone in Jonah's day, the very first reason that we find Jonah running away is exactly what we see in all of the story of Jonah's people. If you go all the way back to Genesis chapter 12, we see the promises of God that as God is forming Jonah's people, part of their DNA as a people is that God will not just be a blessing to them as a people, but the reason that He is blessing them is so that they can overflow as a blessing to all people. That this one small nation, this one small blessed nation, would be a blessing to the ends of the earth. So one of the reasons we see Jonah immediately recoiling from this call from God is that this is really the first time that God is holding His people to this command. Every other prophet who spoke on behalf of the Lord, every other prophet was sent within their people. And Jonah, for the very first time, is being sent to another people. Jonah's being sent outside of not just his comfort zone, but everything he knows of the world. He's sent to preach far from home to a people that he's never met, that he has nothing in common with. But there's so many more reasons why he fled. The second reason we have is that this is not a typical sermon. This is not a typical sermon. The first thing we hear about this sermon that he's supposed to be crafting for Nineveh is that he's to preach not for them, he's primarily to preach against them. He is the person, the prophet, with the sandwich board, calling sinners to turn from their sin. This is not a popular sermon. This is not a typical sermon. Go preach against them, God says. God says, their lives are out of control, and I see every way that their lives are unraveling from the way that I want them to live. They're living way out of line, and I want you to be my intervention. I want you to be my intervention, the one who calls them to turn from everything they're doing and call them back to me. So we've got the first time a prophet is called to a foreign people. We've got this atypical sermon, this uncomfortable sermon. But what makes this command on Jonah? most difficult is the audience to which he is preaching, the people who are receiving this sermon. You see, other than that, the request on Jonah, this ask of God to go and preach against Nineveh, it's difficult, but it's not impossible, it's not unreasonable. Until it is, we realize who it is he's preaching to. Jonah was sent to the city of Nineveh. This is the capital city of the Assyrian Empire. In Jonah's day, this is the great superpower of the world. They had conquered much of the known world from east to west, north to south. They were the most powerful empire in the world. They were not just powerful, they were unstoppable. They were an unstoppable war machine that moved from city to city, steamrolling one after another. And they didn't just have an effective military strategy. They weren't just powerful. They weren't just good at war. They were notorious. They were infamous for their cruelty. All the historians that talk about this brief period of time when Assyria was ruling the world notes how barbaric they were. And it's actually difficult to preach on this because a lot of the details that we have from archaeology, from the history books, are too graphic, honestly, to say on a Sunday morning. What I will say, one instance is maybe even close to palatable. One historian says that when they had conquered a people, one of the things they would do is they would go back to the city that they had just conquered, now filled with widows and fatherless children. And they would go back to those cities, and they would gather all of these widows, these new widows. They would gather all of these new orphans, and they would give them the corpses of their fathers and their husbands. And they would make them parade through the city with them. You see, they weren't just powerful. These are the worst of the worst. Unthinkably horrifying acts. And that is who Jonah was sent to preach against. He was told to travel 700 miles to go out of his way from his hometown to go to their capital city, to stand up in their place of power, to tell the Assyrians, unimaginably barbaric and unstoppably powerful, that God sees every single thing that you've done, and unless you take this moment upon his mercy toward you, unless you take this moment to turn from everything that makes you who you are, you'll be destroyed. And so Jonah, being the prophet, being the man that he was, of course, he wastes no time. He packs his bags, and instead of heading east 700 miles to Nineveh, he immediately goes to the port. He buys a ticket to go west, 2,500 miles west, all the way to Tarshish. Nineveh is east, and so Jonah does the very most instinctive thing he can think of. He gets on a boat and goes due west, 2,500 miles to modern-day Spain. And in this time, this is Jonah, in Jonah's world, this is the farthest place they have on the map. Jonah bought a one-way ticket to the ends of the earth. And did you notice the passage doesn't say that Jonah is running from all the reasons we just discussed. He doesn't say in the passage that Jonah is fleeing from the Assyrians, or fleeing from the sermon, or fleeing from the barbarism. No, he's not fleeing from the Assyrians. Did you notice what our passage says? Over and over, it says throughout the book of Jonah that Jonah was running away not from the Assyrians, but from God. And in fact, in the Hebrew, it's even more poetic. It says he's not just running away from God, it says he's running away, he's fleeing from God's face. He doesn't want to face God. He doesn't want anything to do with God in this moment. He is running away from God's face. Jonah wasn't just trying to escape from the Assyrians. He was trying desperately to escape from God's sight. He was trying with everything he knew he could do to hide from God. And the thing is, some of us are doing the same thing that Jonah did. We're trying, whether we recognize it or not, whether it's conscious or subconscious, we are distancing ourselves from God. We're escaping from him. We're escaping from the way that he might take full control, as he wants to do, over our lives, to actually speak and command us in our every move. We're afraid of what that might look like, and so we board the first ticket, the first boat that we can get on, and we either flee and run away, or we just slowly, silently drift away. But knowingly or unknowingly, we tend to become fugitives. Fugitives from God. Whether we're boarding a speedboat or slowly drifting on a raft, we become fugitives, even to the ends of the earth. We chart our courses to the ends of the earth, trying to run away from God, escaping all of who he is and what he has for us. And if we look closely at Jonah's story, we realize as we look closely enough that it becomes a mirror. It's a mirror for us to interpret how we respond to the call of God. It's meant to show us our human impulse, and instead of running toward God as we're meant to do, to live in the full sight of God, we hide from his face. Instead of running toward him, we tend with all of our might to run away from him. But thanks be to God, that is not the end of the story. That is not the end of the story. God does not let us run away. He does not let us drift away. In fact, he chases after each and every one of us, including Jonah. Look at verse 4. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up, to break apart. See, it's not long after Jonah feels like he had finally, hid below deck. He had finally escaped the sight of God. I imagine him kind of cramped in the farthest corner, the farthest nook below deck. And finally, when he felt like he had escaped the gaze of God, is exactly when God brings the crashing reminder that we cannot hide from him. And all the people on board, do you notice what they begin doing? All the people above deck, they begin praying. They realize that their buckets are not big enough to get all the water off the boat. They realize that the wood is not strong enough to weather this storm, and so they begin each crying out to their own God in their own languages. People from all over the world, they begin crying out to their gods in their own languages for help, for anything. And then they do all that they know to do. They start to try to stabilize the ship, and so they toss everything that they could spare overboard. And finally, when they're looking for the last things that they might throw overboard, they go below deck, and who do they find? They find Jonah. And in our English, it says that Jonah is asleep in the boat. In the Hebrew, in the original language, the wording actually suggests that instead of being deeply asleep, Jonah is almost in a trance. That he's sleeping with his eyes open, kind of sense. That Jonah's in a trance. And while every other sailor is crying out to their own God, here is Jonah, staring into the dark, paralyzed. Paralyzed because he had no God left to cry to. Would you think about that just for a moment? That Jonah would rather sink to the ocean floor. He would rather drown than come out of his hiding place before the God who he is so desperately to escape the gaze of. Jonah never cries out to God. And they all meet on the deck with nothing left to throw overboard, and they know that this storm must be God's doing because they've never seen a storm like this before. And so as a last effort, it says that they cast lots. They cast lots on the deck to see who God had sent this storm against. And all of the lots point toward Jonah. All the signs point to Jonah. And so they ask him, verse 8, "Tell us who is responsible for making all this trouble for us. What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country again? And from what people are you?" And they're frantically trying to figure out, to piece together this puzzle of what Jonah did wrong to bring such a divine anger over the sea. And so he answers them, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." And look at their response, verse 10. This terrified them. And they asked, "What have you done?" In other words, what have you done to upset such a powerful, almighty God? What did you think you were doing when you went against someone who made the oceans? Did you think that the oceans would not respond to his commands while you remained disobedient? What have you done? And Jonah has no response. And so they begin to get a little bit more frantic. Well, what should we do about it? And Jonah just says, "Throw me in. Throw me over. You see, this is my fault. Throw me over. No one else needs to die. And the only way that you'll be safe, the only way that all of you will live, is if I'm thrown in, if I die in place of you." And at first they refused. They don't want blood on their hands, and there had to be some other way. And they're kind of perusing, looking for anything that they might loosen to throw overboard, but the storm grows fiercer and fiercer, and eventually they throw Jonah overboard. over the side of the boat, and as soon as his very last hair is submerged under the waves, the sea grows calm. And as Jonah sank beneath the water, the crew of the ship all sank to their knees, with their faces pressed against the wet, hard wood. And they begin worshiping Jonah's God. You see, ironically, the story of Jonah is a prophet who's revealed, exposed to be a heathen. All the while, these heathens, these sailors, become true worshipers. You see, Jonah didn't understand grace. He's exposed for not just not understanding grace, but not understanding really who God is and how he operates. He had no concept of who God really is. All he wanted was to slowly, silently, hiddenly drift out of God's sight, outside of God's reach, pretending as if God didn't exist, to run away from God as if God couldn't or wouldn't pursue him. And so many of us, again, so many of us, if we allow Jonah to be the mirror that it's meant to be, so many of us are living lives either running from God or at least trying subconsciously to drift out of his control. We're drifting or we're running away from God, and when we are finally, in a moment of desperation, being thrashed by the waves that life throws at us, we are caught in a trance. Because we've forgotten the God in which we can cry out to. And thanks be to God, friends. Again, I promised you that that's not how the story ends. Next week, Alex Bahala, a pastoral candidate in the Twin Cities, with a wonderful story of his own conversion to faith from Hinduism. He's going to continue our story, going through Jonah 2. But that's not how Jonah's story ends, and that's also not how our story ends. You see, all the while, as we're either drifting from God or running away from God, trying to find what to us would be the ends of the earth, a different city, I'm sure, for each of us, as we're running away or drifting away, God had made a plan all the while to come after us, to chase us down, to take on flesh for all of us who are caught in the storms of the fiercest seas. Running and drifting, and he allows us to go no further because he will outrun you and he will outrun me. He chases after you. Do you know that? Just when you feel like you've hidden below deck in the smallest, darkest corners and you've finally escaped that one thing about him that you hoped nothing else just to escape from, that one command on your life that makes you deeply uncomfortable, or that one aspect about who he has revealed himself to be that makes you uncomfortable, and you've hidden below deck, he does not allow you to hide. Whether it's your sin or your doubt or your shame or anything else, he finds you, He finds me. He chases after you, and what he wants, who he wants, he gets. He chases after us, and rather than letting us be thrown into the ocean of all of our wrongs, he offered himself. The same words of Jonah. He looks out into an ocean of death and an ocean of sin, all the wrongs that we should be held accountable for. And he looks at us and he said, "Why don't you throw me in? Throw me in. Let me be thrown over. And yes, this is all your fault, but let me take it. Let me bear it. No one but me needs to die. No one else needs to die. It's the only way all of you will live." Jesus was always meant to be the Savior of our story. He is our greater Jonah. And friends, we are about to turn to a table that reminds us of this. God himself in flesh, Christ offering himself up to be thrown into the rage of God's sea. All for you and all for me. So that as we cry out to him, we would find not a God who holds everything against us, but a God who forgives us to the extent of offering himself for us.